as I talk about in my book, stayed home in the last election because they don't think either party cares about it. The Democrats, when it comes to immigration, what are they interested in? Votes. Votes. They'll bring in as many people as possible because they all think they're going to vote for them. And Republicans, well, here's the sad story of Republicans. The sad story of Republicans is that most Republicans are for more immigration. Most Republicans are for some form of amnesty. In fact, all but one that I'm aware of is for some form of amnesty. Me. Everybody else in this race is for some form of amnesty. Broad-based. Whether it's citizenship or green card, or whether it's a permanent work visa. And I'll lay it out who they are. If you want to know, I'll tell you. Go on that USA website and you'll see it. I'll show you the amendments they offered in Congress. There's only one who said this very simple thing. The greatest thing about America. I was asked this question by a young man who's Hispanic. He asked this question in Fort Worth today, and he said, talked about who he was in his little written question. He said, what do you think about the DREAM Act? I said, you know what the great thing about America is? People come to this country. One of the principal reasons they come to this country is they come from a country where authoritarian figures rule the day and the law is what they say it is. They don't want to live in a country governed by men and women who are in authority. They want to come to a country that's governed by laws. And that no one's above the law. And then they come into this country illegally and say, oh, I want to be above the law. You can't come into the country and say, I'm here because America's successful, because we're a country of laws and nobody's above it, and then ask them to put above it. That's the most compassionate part of America, is the president isn't above the law. Senators aren't above the law. And people who come here illegally are not above the law. You go out and you deliver this message, ladies and gentlemen, of economic opportunity for everybody to rise, a manufacturing economy, an energy economy. And you talk about providing work opportunities, and you put an immigration plan out there that enforces our laws on illegal immigration. Not just the border. Oh, they'll all come out here and tell you they're from border security. When you have someone come up and all they start talking about is border security, you know you got a problem. Because we all agree on border security. That's not the issue. The issue is what are you going to do with people who are here, and what are you going to do about the fact that we bring in 1,050,000 legal immigrants every year into this country, including two programs that I will get rid of. Number one, called the Visa Lottery Program, and number two, called Chain Migration. You get rid of those two programs, that's 300,000 people a year. Almost all of whom are unskilled, almost all of whom are coming from third world countries, most of them are hostile to America. You want somebody who's going to go out and lay it out and connect with workers and win states that we got to win. The states that, if we don't win, given the demographic shift in this country, we're not going to see many presidents elected who are Republicans. You know what those states are? Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa, right across there. Those are states we can win, and I can tell you the message that'll win it. You're here and here tonight. And that's why I ask for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
I will cut you off if you get wordy.
Iron fist.
I appreciate your comments about the flat tax. What kind of consideration have you given to the Fed tax?
I love the idea of a consumption tax. If I were going to start all over and build a tax system, I'd build a consumption tax system. It's the best way. You don't tax work, you don't tax savings, you don't tax investment. It's the best way to go about it. The problem is a little thing called the 16th Amendment. And the 16th Amendment says that you have a right to levy an income tax. And here's what I don't want to do. I don't want what will happen, which is, so we'll go to a national sales tax, and that will not be an easy thing to do, but we can go to a national sales tax. And then the first thing that's going to happen once the Democrat gets in charge is well, people who are high income are getting over scot-free on this, and we just need to put an income tax just on the wealthy. That's how the income tax was sold originally, by the way, just on the wealthy. And then we get both the sales tax and the income tax. I don't want to give the federal government more ways to get in your pocket. And so it's not that I oppose the fair tax, it just, unless you can get rid of the 16th Amendment, then I can't be for the fair tax because it would be both instead of one or the other. By the way, the flat tax approximates the fair tax about as close as you can get. I mean, it really does, particularly when you do the credit, which is like the prebate in the fair tax.
I was wondering about Social Security and Medicare because you didn't mention it in the tax plan. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, in fact, in our tax plan, we get rid of all the Obamacare taxes. And let me give you a broad thing. We get rid of all the Obamacare taxes. Okay, and according to the Tax Foundation, which ran this thing, that we get rid of all the taxes. And I mentioned all the other things we get rid of. Over a 10-year period of time, according to the Tax Foundation, this will add, according to them, about $1.1 trillion to the deficit. Okay? Now that's not a good thing, except this. We get rid of all the Obamacare taxes, but we don't get credit for getting rid of the Obamacare subsidies. Which, of course, if we get rid of the taxes, we're going to get rid of the subsidies. We're going to get rid of all of Obamacare, not just how it pays for it. If you take into account that we get rid of Obamacare, which is part of our plan, there's actually a $600 billion surplus in revenue, more revenue than expenditures over that 10-year period. We can use that to actually replace Obamacare and also begin to make investments in areas like we should, like national defense. In addition, we need to cut the budget. So none of this is just the tax plan. This isn't the budget cuts. And so Social Security and Medicare are two areas, and I'd add Medicaid, are three areas that are vitally important. Why? Because they make up over half the federal budget. So when you hear a candidate, and I'll mention his name, Mike Huckabee, who says we shouldn't cut Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security, what he's saying is we can't cut 2/3 of the federal budget. Well, then how are you going to shrink the size of government? You add interest, you got 3/4 of the size of government. And so, and then you take out defense, you're down to about 15% of government, 10, 12% of government. Well, you cut it all, you still don't balance the budget. So you have to do something with entitlement programs. Here's three quick ideas. Medicaid. You may, I think Julie mentioned that one of the things I accomplished when I was a freshman senator, in my first year in the Senate, first and second year, I was able to negotiate the greatest conservative victory in the last 30 years since Reagan. And that is the ending of a federal entitlement called Aid to Families with Dependent Children, welfare. And you say, how did you do that with a Democratic president and only 54 votes in the Senate? Remember, we heard, that's where we are today, exactly where we are today. So, well, we can't pass anything because we have a Democratic president. There's only 54, we need 60 votes. Guess what? We needed to get 60 votes for welfare reform. And we needed to get a Democratic president to either sign it or override his veto. And we were able to do it. Bill Clinton is not some moderate Democrat, as we all know. How did we do it? Because I sat down. This is what's called leadership, and it's hard. Leadership is hard. It's also not very sexy. Because it's real easy to run out in front of the crowd and scream and holler about how terrible things are and that you're going to fight stuff. It's real hard to get behind the scenes and work with people and put together a deal that actually gets something done. Because then you have to share credit with everybody. Then you're not the person out there clanging the cymbals. You're the person conducting the orchestra. And the conductor of the orchestra doesn't make a lot of noise. But the orchestra doesn't run very well. It doesn't sound very good without it. And so what I did is I worked behind the scenes, and here's what I found out. A difference between a good compromise and a bad compromise. Because there are good compromises. If you're still married, you know about those. If you're not married, you probably never figured that out. And a good compromise is a compromise where you get less of a good thing. You get a good thing, you just get less of what you wanted, but it's still a good thing. A bad compromise is when you force them to give you less of a bad thing. It's still a bad thing. Therefore, it's not a good compromise. So welfare reform was very simple to me. There are 4 things we wanted to accomplish. Oh, there's a lot more I wanted to accomplish. The 4 things that I absolutely had to have was we were going to end the federal entitlement. We were going to block grant it to the states. We were going to block grant it and cap the money over a 10-year period of time. And we're going to put a work requirement and time limits. Because we're going to talk about the dignity of work and the power of earned success. Listen to those words. Earned success. You want to talk about the key to happiness in America? Earned success. And we've gotten away from that in America. So that was the focus. And so I negotiated with Bill Clinton, and I can tell you, truth, conservative groups in Washington beat my brains in. Because I was compromising with Clinton and spending more money on daycare and spending more money on transportation and spending more money on all these things. And I did. And I did. Because I needed that to get his vote. And I needed his vote to pass this. And I could have said, I'm not going to compromise. And welfare would still be a federal entitlement. And things would be, I can't even tell you how much bigger government would be. And how much worse off America would be. But I said, you know what? I'm willing to spend more money because if what I believe in is right, then there's going to be a whole lot less people on welfare. There's going to be a whole lot more people working. And even though there's more money out there, it will never be used because there aren't enough people to use it. And so guess what happened? We cut the welfare rolls in half. And guess what? Even more important. That's good. We saved money for the states, not for us, because we told the states we'd give them a block grant. So the states saved a ton of money. Guess what else we did? We lowered the poverty rate to the lowest level in generations. In some cases, for the most chronically poor, minority children born out of wedlock, lowest rate ever recorded. Now, conservative groups impaled me for making those deals. Now the same groups tout how great a success this was. Right? Ladies and gentlemen, Julie talked about experience. I have experience not just on putting forth good, strong, bold conservative plans, but getting them passed. In working with people, even though I don't necessarily like them or agree with them, but you have to respect them and they have to trust you. Because if you don't have trust, if you're not willing to listen to the other side and try to find some place where you can accommodate that doesn't violate your principles, that moves you down the road, behind the scenes where no one sees it happen, then great things are not going to happen in this country. And that's why you need real leadership. And that's why I'm running and asking for your support. Yes, ma'am.
My question's on immigration. I have a coworker that it took 14 years to get her half-sister here from Guatemala. They had to jump through hoops. She had to prove as a supporter that she could take care of her sister. Her sister had to go through psychological evaluation, medical evaluation, and after 14 years, she's finally here. Her brother is not here. He's been trying to get here for 17 years. My question is, why is this process so long, and why, when the illegals come here, they get it all day one?
We make it very difficult for people who obey the law, and then we give a pass to people who don't. That's the bottom line in this system today. And I can tell you, I talked to a lot of legal immigrants in this country, and they are furious about how they're treated. People who come here on visas, I talked about half of the people who are here illegally are here on visas. Student visas, work visas, visitor visas, whatever. They're here legally, and then they want to extend their visas, and they can't get it extended, so they just end up staying. And why do they stay? Because we don't enforce law. We don't tell people to leave. In fact, I was on a radio show with a guy in South Carolina the other day, and he was telling me as a friend who was here on a work visa, has been trying to extend it for 2 years while he was still legal. And he couldn't get it extended. Not that he wasn't eligible, they just the paperwork at the time and all the other things I'm just hearing here. And he finally said, look, I'm going to be illegal here soon. And they said, don't worry about it. We're not going to do anything. Just don't worry about it. We'll get to it. This is the way our federal government acts, right? So this is the problem with the bureaucracy in Washington. So the answer is, obviously, if we limit the number of legal immigrants and we focus more time and attention on that legal immigration system and put the resources in place, part of it is a management problem. Part is an attitudinal problem within the department. So yes, we have to get better at enforcing the law and getting people in this country processed in a way that makes sense. But look, part of the problem that you're seeing is that a lot of people do come into this country and say they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then they don't. And so they end up being wards of the state, and again, under this administration, they're not going to say anything. They're going to be going on these welfare programs. Not that most of them do, most of them don't. One of the reasons most of them don't is we actually are very tough about bringing people in here and getting the kind of support, letters that we need for family and friends. So we make it tough for people to come in. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. What I am opposed to is making it easy on the people who break the law. And that's where I park.
Well, Senator, I hate to ask a question like I'm a liberal journalist, but given your immigration plan, you're going to have to answer a question like this at some point, at least you're in a room full of friends. Under your immigration plan, what does happen to the 11, 20, 30 million illegals who are here, including now the Middle Easterners? Thank you.
Here's, on the illegals, I talked about this at the debate the other day. Let's say 12 million. That's the number that's generally used by the administration. Depending on whose numbers you believe, there's any 40 to 60% of those 12 million are visa overstays. So people came here with a visa, biometric passports, we know who they are, we know their name, and we know where they are, by and large, and we don't tell them to go home. We don't do anything to say, okay, it's time to leave, and you need to exit, and you need to check out, and you need to, we have to track the exit. So, I don't know of anybody, even the folks on the immigration side, who thinks that people came here legally shouldn't have to return home after their visa expired. That's half the problem, ladies and gentlemen. That's 6 of the 12 million, maybe even more, maybe a little less, but anywhere from 5 to 7 million of the 12 million are here on visa overstays. We know their names. We know where they are. And we know they can be sent home, and most of them, actually countries where it's not an issue to send them home. So, number one, you've now cut your problem in half. So what do you do with the remaining? Very easy. You have a E-Verify system that says that every company in America has to get a Social Security number and run it through E-Verify to determine whether that person is legally in this country and eligible for work. And if they're not, they can't work. Period. And you go through the process as even this administration is doing, which is eliminate sanctuary cities. How do you do that? If you're a sanctuary city, you don't get any federal funds. So if you want to be a sanctuary city, go right ahead. We are going to deny you federal funds. All federal funds. Here's the amazing thing. The media holds up sanctuary cities as these paragons of virtue. And then they look at Kim Davis. Same issue, folks. She's deciding you have an actual statutory law that was passed by the Congress, signed by the President, that talks about immigration policy in America, and you have people in elective office saying, we are not going to conform with the law. And they're applauded by the media. You have a rogue Supreme Court decision, which never addresses whether county courts have to issue licenses or not. And all of a sudden, there's a constitutional crisis if she doesn't enforce the law. We can no longer sit on the sidelines and allow this baloney double standard that the media tries to, and the left tries to impose on America.
Yes, sir.
We need to call them out for what they do.
This is a little off the subject. What is your NRA standing?
I'm proud to say that I've spoken at every NRA convention since I was a member of Congress. I've been invited every time, and I've been invited for the 9 years since I was out of office. Because when I was in office, not only did I have a perfect rating by the NRA, but I was fighting the battles when I was in the House in the 90s and in the Senate in the 90s, when the Second Amendment wasn't as popular as it was now. Ever since 9/11, the attitudes of Americans on Second Amendments changed dramatically. But I was fighting Bill Clinton and the gun bans and all the other things that were going on. And I worked hand in glove with the NRA to make sure that no really bad laws passed. Now, I know we had the gun ban, which was not a good law, but it really took out 15 or so particular weapons, but the access to other like it were still available. So it wasn't a huge infringement given what could have happened, which was a lot of infringement upon the Second Amendment. So I'm very proud of the fact that the NRA not only supported me in every one of my elections, but usually ran full-throated campaigns in support because they knew they had a leader who was willing to stand up and fight. And look, Pennsylvania is not Texas. Okay? Okay? We have 1.5 million more registered Democrats and Republicans in my state. And I have 92% conservative rating in the United States Congress. I know that's not 100. I apologize. But I remind you that Julie alluded to this. Just a little electoral background. I got elected in a 60% Democratic district against a 14-year incumbent, outspent 3-1, never run for office before, knocked on 20,000 doors, worked harder than anybody else had ever run, given no chance to win. In fact, when I won, the AP, when they announced the winner, they didn't announce the winner. They announced that he lost. And they didn't put my name in the release. And so the Wall Street Journal, I found this out later, the Wall Street Journal, because it was in the Wall Street Journal the next day, it was actually Thursday maybe his edition. Wall Street Journal published in the front page a little blurb saying, on Tuesday night, we called the Republican National Congressional Committee, which is the campaign committee for the House of Republicans. And we asked who was the winner, because we only announced who the loser was in the release. And they didn't have his name. I got no support, none. I didn't get one penny. Here's the beauty of this. Greatest thing that happened to me. When I ran for election, it was in 1990. It was a redistricting year the next year. We lost 2 seats in Pennsylvania to Texas, by the way. But I was okay because you guys elected a conservative here in all likelihood. But we lost 2 congressional seats, and one of them I knew, even if I won, was going to be mine because I was the new guy. Right? And it was an area of the state that was losing a lot of population. And so they put me, so I knew my seat was going to be eliminated. And so I went to Washington, got not one penny of support from Washington, knowing that my own party was going to sacrifice me. And so I had 2 years to do the right thing.
Nice.
Now, I like to think that I'm a really good enough guy that I would have done that, and maybe I would have. But in this case, that's all I could do, in my mind, was just go down there for 2 years, do the right thing. And you know what? It made all the difference. Because they did redistrict me. They put me in a 70% Democratic district. With a 28-year Democratic incumbent. In 1992, George Bush, H.W., got 29% in my district. I got 61. Why? Because steelworkers in the most depressed area of southwestern Pennsylvania, at the depth of the depression in the steel industry, saw someone fighting for them. Someone standing up to both parties, kicking a little tail, and getting things done. And guess what happened? I was part of a group called the Gang of Seven that put the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the most powerful, it's Paul Ryan's committee, put him in jail. Speaker of the House got 36 years. Republicans have been in the minority. After 4 years in the House, we turned the majority for the first time to Republicans. And I was part of that leadership team that did that. And in 1994, I ran for the United States Senate that year against another Democratic incumbent. This guy had his campaign run by none other than James Carville and Paul McGowan. They elected Clinton in 92, and they came back. They had elected this guy earlier. They went down and worked for Clinton, and they came back. He was the author of Hillary Care in the Senate. This was an election in Pennsylvania. Well, at that point, only 1 million more registered Democrats and Republicans. And I ran against the Clinton team. Hillary and Bill were in my state. They had to hold on to this. They thought, going to be the deciding vote as to whether the Senate would go Republican and Democrat, and it was the lead guy on their bill. I took on Carville and McGowan, outspent and beat him. 4 years later, I ran for re-election. Was the only conservative to win a state George Bush lost. Bush lost by 5, I won. Lost by 4, I won by 5. I just share that with you. That if you're looking for someone who can succeed in Washington and can get the votes you need from the other side of the aisle in tough states, there's only one person in this race with a track record like that. That's it, one person. And I tell you, that's why the national media wants nothing to do with us. Because they know we connect with the very voters that we need to win. And that's why you're not going to hear much about me. That's why I'm spending my time in Iowa. Yes.
Hi, Rick. Earlier you talked about the depreciation going away. Just to give you a little background, I'm the accounting manager at Pier 1 Imports in downtown Fort Worth. So the majority of my job is spent with fixed assets and depreciation.
Inventory expense, everything's expense.
So, so the question is, would it just go away immediately, or would there be, what would happen to the assets that are currently?
It would be a transition from existing assets would be under the old law, and then everything new starting at a certain point. Usually what happens in tax bills, when they introduce the bill, they'll pick a date.
Right.
And say from this date forward, here's how it's going to work.
Okay.
So everybody knows the date. It's usually a date out into the into the future, and it may be the first of the fiscal year, it may be the first of the calendar year. That's all in the implementation legislation.
And then all current assets would be, expensed immediately.
All future assets, right? And from that point forward, be expensive.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi. I think that everything you say and all the plans you put forward in your campaign, both this one and the last one, resonate with people like in this room, conservatives. And if we could craft our perfect candidate from a policy standpoint, it would be you. And yet, your polling numbers are still low. You had some successes in 2012, but didn't make it through. Conservatives seem to be flocking to people like Donald Trump, and I always ask myself, why? So my question to you is, what is the campaign doing, and what can we do, beyond the obvious of sending you money, to get Santorum?
Get those smartphones out right now.
I talked to several people this past week saying, hey, I get to go hear Rick Santorum speak on Monday, and they're like, Rick Santorum, I think I've heard that name. Who is he? They don't know who you are, and yet when they hear you speak and hear your message, they're going to walk away going, that's my guy. But we have to get the message out there, and it just isn't happening.
Well, look, I'm counting on that. That's what happened 4 years ago. We got no coverage. Fortunately, we didn't have an RNC and a net news media that's decided that they want to limit the candidates on the stage. They allowed everybody on the stage. And so I had an opportunity. But even then, I had that. At this point in time, 4 years ago, I was at 1% in the polls. And I've been in 15 debates probably by now. And people would say, oh, yeah, I like that guy, but I can't win. Or most of the time in the debates, they put me over at the kids' table. And they'd ask me questions because, look, I'm most known by the work I've done on moral and cultural issues. And there's a reason for that. Because nobody else does. Nobody else does. Nobody else is willing to take those fights. You just go look at even your conservative warrior senators. How many take on those battles? Oh, not the popular battles. I'm talking about the real abortion battles, the real marriage battles. Take them on, because they're hard and you pay a huge price. All you have to do is Google my name to find out the price you pay. Right? It's not pretty. They beat you up. And so, we had to come, basically do the things that you just said. We went out, and this is what we're doing now. We're going to Iowa. Thanks be to God for Iowa. And I don't mean Iowa in itself, but the fact that the Iowa caucuses are about 20% of Republicans vote in the Iowa caucuses. I was with one of my campaign workers the other day, and she was telling me that 5 people she works with are all Trump supporters. And she just said casually, they're all really 100% for him. And she said, I have a question, how many of you have ever been to a caucus? And none of them had ever been to a caucus. And she says, well, you have to vote in a caucus. None of them knew that. And they said, well, what's a caucus? And she described, you have to go to a place at 7 o'clock at night on February 1st, and you have to go there and sign in. You go into a big room and you sit there and you listen to speeches, and they organize the party, elect the chairs, and elect delegates and things like that, and then you get a vote. It's about a 2-hour process. All of them said, I'm not doing that. Caucuses are not for the faint of heart. That's only 20%. Now, why is that the case? Because you get your real activists who pay real attention. Now you say, well, that limits. No, it doesn't. I want the folks who are doing the screening for the president to actually know something about the candidates that they're screening.
Yes, sir.
And I can tell you, the people in Iowa, this experience happens almost daily. Multiple places in Iowa. If you haven't met every one of the candidates, you haven't tried. Because they're everywhere. And they're open to meet with you, and you know what? They can separate, well, I would say, the wheat from the chaff, the corn from the chaff, the ear from the stalk, okay, the kernels from the stalk, or the kernels from the cob, whatever, use your analogy. But they can do it, right? They know how to combine. They know how to make and that's what they did with me. I will tell you, a week before the Iowa caucuses, I was at 2% in the national polls. A week before. A month before the Iowa caucuses, in Iowa, I was at 4%. And I ended up with 26%. And I'm just telling you, part of that is the surge that came, but part of it is polling. Is there media here?
Yes.
I'll say it anyway. Sucks. Okay? It's terrible. In fact, I don't know if you saw, Gallup is not polling this race. Because it's unreliable. Pew is thinking of not polling this race. Why? Because it's unreliable. It's a vicious cycle. Who's at the top of the polls? Well, the people who get covered because they're at the top of the polls. Who stays at the top of the polls? The people who get covered. I was just on Fox last week. They looked at the time last week that all the candidates had. Donald Trump, 2.5 hours. Chris Christie, 2 hours and 10 minutes. Fiorina, 2 hours. Or, Bush, Carson, all around an hour and a half or so. Rick Santorum, 23 minutes. And then they say, well, he's only at 1 or 2%. Well, he can't. Hello? This is the problem. Now, the good thing is, people in Iowa don't pay attention to the national polls. I learned that. It was 2%, and they voted for me. They voted for me. Why? Because when you get closer to the caucus, people who say they're going to go actually are probably going to go. And so polls get more accurate. And people realize as they get closer what they're going to have to do and say, oh, I'm not going there. I'm not doing that. And all of a sudden, people who actually aren't going say they're not going and they're not going to vote. I'm confident that what you're experiencing here tonight is experienced in Iowa every day that I'm there. I'm going there tomorrow. And that we'll build that base, and we're going to surprise people again. What I need in the meantime is fuel for the tank. And yes, that's dollars, and we'd appreciate it. You folks have a few of those here in Texas, I'm told. And things are going pretty well. Or at least we talk to all the folks from Texas. You guys are all very, very wealthy. You're all doing great. And so so number one, we like coming to Texas for that reason. But number two, you can also help. You can get involved grassroots. We have a call from home program. We have all sorts of things you can do to help call into Iowa. And I can tell you, last time around, we raised as much money in the 2 days after Iowa, even though we didn't win on caucus night. We won, but we weren't announced the winner on caucus night. Romney was. It wasn't until 3 weeks later we were announced the winner. And just even with that, even though we didn't win, and Romney went on to win Massachusetts, almost Massachusetts these days, New Hampshire, and the race was over because no one had ever won Iowa and New Hampshire and not won the nomination. And so, for all intents and purposes, the race was over after New Hampshire. It wasn't until a week and a half after New Hampshire I was declared the winner. But 2 primaries had happened. We were off to 2 more that I finished poorly in. But then I came back and won 10 other primaries, being outspent 4 and 5 to 1 in most of those cases. So, if you want someone who's going to go against the powerful special interests, go against the big money, you got someone who's done that as a career. Okay? about campaigns. You can spend your time going around to big donors' houses and to corporate boardrooms and to all these Koch brothers and like things and hobnob with donors and raise a lot of money. Or you can go out and do town hall meetings and you can talk to voters. There's enough time to do a whole lot of both. I've committed myself to running a lean campaign so I can spend time with voters. Because that's what I did last time. And by the way, when you win, you're beholden to nobody except the folks at the grassroots level who elected you. And that's what I like. Take one more question. Thanks.
A subject that's very near and dear to my heart. And from the show of hands I saw earlier, a lot of people in this room, the military. It's kind of become a social experiment. It wasn't when I served, but it is now. How do you fix that?
Well, first, thank you for your service. And I did not serve. I have a son who is going to be going to the Air Force in about 18 months. And so it's going to be very personal to me. Because if I'm successful, he'll be in when I'm Commander-in-Chief. How do you change things? Here's the greatest thing about the area that you talked about. I can talk about spending. I can talk about taxes. I can talk about reform of government programs. Talk about all these things. And to do that, we need a lot of cooperation in Congress. It's going to be a tough, laborious fight to make real changes in Washington, D.C. The area you can make changes overnight is the area in which the president has actually authority to do that. And that is national security and foreign policy. If you look at what happened when Ronald Reagan was sworn into office, the world changed that day.
Yeah.
That day. There are a lot of good people running for president. There are not a lot of people with national security experience. There are very, very few. We have a bunch of first-term senators, we have a bunch of governors, none of which have been around, none of which have done anything in far length of time and experience. And we have a lot of people who have never been inside government who have no national security experience at all. We have not a deep field on what I would say may be the most important issue coming up in this election. Why? Because we're going up against a Secretary of State or a Vice President, but someone who can stand there and say, hey, I know this to be true. Remember what happened 4 years ago with Mitt Romney during the foreign policy debate, when he and Obama challenged each other and Romney pushed back and Obama said, look, I know what I'm talking about here. Because I was president, I went through this. What happened? Romney backed off. Why do you back off? Well, if I'm sitting here with a real estate agent from Texas and I'm coming in to look at a home, and I read an article in the morning news saying, well, real estate values are down here in Flower Mound. And so I go to my real estate agent and say, oh, yeah, real estate values are down here in Flower Mound. She said, no, they're not. So, yeah, they are. Yeah, I just got briefed on this. So, they're going down. And she said, well, let me tell you, I've been here for 20 years. Let me tell you that. And what are you going to do? Argue with her? So that's the problem when you go in with no experience against someone who has experience. Julie talks about, I served 8 years on the Armed Services Committee. That was just the beginning. Ronald Reagan was governor. He said, well, how does the governor have foreign policy experience? Because he took the time to gain the knowledge and led. Yes, I led in the Congress. I led to try to transform our military when I was on Armed Services prior to 9/11. And I led afterwards on national security issues like trying to get Hezbollah and Syria out of Lebanon. And I led on nuclear issues with Iran. Julie mentioned the Iran Freedom and Support Act. That bill imposed the sanctions that brought Iran to the table. And that was a bill I introduced 12 years ago. 12 years ago. And when I tried to get it passed 9 years ago, 2006, I was opposed on the floor of the Senate, lost by 4 votes. You know who those 4 votes were? Clinton, Kerry, Obama, Biden. Now, wouldn't it be nice to be able to go up and talk about Iran and talk about experience? Talk about someone getting it right and other folks getting it wrong way back then. Wouldn't it be good to be able to have someone who understands the threat of radical Islam and 10 years ago gave a speech at the National Press Club? Here all the candidates said, oh, we have to name the enemy. That's the big thing. We have to name the enemy, identify the enemy. I gave that speech 10 years ago at the National Press Club and put it on George W. Bush's desk and asked him to give the same speech. After I left the United States Senate, I spent 5 years at a think tank writing, lecturing about radical Islam and national security. This is a very important issue. Commander-in-Chief is not an entry-level position. I've been taking some online courses about brain surgery, but I'm not quite ready for that. I'm not too sure you folks want me on the operating room.
How do you fix the VA then?
Well, the VA, my parents worked at my parents worked at the VA for 40 years. I grew up on a VA grounds. I lived in barracks my first 18 years of my life, and not in World War II housing. And I saw the deterioration of the VA over the years that my parents were there. When my mom and dad came, my mom's going to turn 97 this month, so you're going to have me around for a while. and she and my dad would come home and talk about the deterioration of the VA. And that when they went into the VA, my mom in the 40s, my dad in the early 50s, the VA system was the best in the world. Why? Because our best and brightest served there right after the war. And we didn't have a private hospital system to speak of in America. That's now all changed. Why? Because government doesn't run things well. And so what we need to do is talk to our veteran service organizations who've been the major impediment of this for a long, long time, which is to say we need to transition the VA away from a primary healthcare system for our veterans and transition the VA into an area of specialty care. There are areas where the VA can and should be centers of excellence. And there are areas that are specific, are disorders and diseases that are specifically geared to veterans, like PTSD, like wound care, like orthotic, things like that. Those are the areas that we can have clinics around the country. We can get the best and the brightest. Why? Because that's where the care takes. That's where the issues are. And let our veterans go to the best care in America, which is now in our private hospitals around America. So again. The White House is not a place for on-the-job training. It's not popular right now. I know you like outsiders. I know you want someone to shake things up. Crowley Theory said the other day, well, that tank in there is the water's polluted, they're swimming around, they don't even know. That's true. But you know what? Whoever wins the presidency is going to have to swim in that tank. They're going to have to swim in that tank and in that water. And guess what? They're going to have to know where the sharks are. They're going to have to know how to survive in that tank and clean it up. And what you have is someone with a track record who not only survived in that tank, but thrived in that tank. Cleaned up that tank. That was our first conservative victory in 40 years. Passed not only national security legislation. Anybody have a health savings account? Anybody know what health savings accounts are? Mm-hmm. You know who introduced health savings accounts? Me. Right? Why did I do that? Because Republicans didn't want to offer any ideas. And I was there to offer ideas and to break molds. To try to put forward plans to put conservative principles in place to deal with problems today. And I have a track record of winning a lot of battles. You want to feel good and shake things up and put someone in there who can scream and holler from, that he can, it's going to be huge and make things great and all that kind of stuff. Great. Feel good about it. But you're not going to change Washington. You know why? Because the president's not a CEO. The president's not a CEO. You go in and sit down with a group of congressmen and say, this is the way it's going to be. Good luck. The Senate is populated with 100 people who think they should have your job. You better be able to work with those egos and better be able to talk above their head to make sure that they're feeling very warm and fuzzy towards you because of that. You have an opportunity. I know, Texas isn't a really primary state, but you have an opportunity. You got power here in this state. You got real power. You got financial power. You got power in national organizations. You can make a difference. Don't ever think you can't. And one of my favorite sayings is every day we get up and we tell ourselves lies so we can live. And the lie we love to tell ourselves in America is, well, just one person, what difference can I make? 48 people took China over. Imagine what you can do. You saw what the Tea Party could do in 2010. And a lot of people think it's over. It's only over if you say it is. That's right. People ask me why I'm running. The answer is simply this. Because I see what's going on in America today. And it's not pretty. America, in many respects, is going through a very, very difficult time. And I would say even most respects right now. And here's the sad thing. It happened under our watch, ladies and gentlemen. You can go and complain about them. But them is us.
Yes, sir.
We let it happen. The interest of gay marriage is a perfect example. When they lost the gay marriage issue, what did they do? They came back and filed suit the next day, and they went back fighting the next day. And what happened with our guys? 10 of our 14 candidates said this is the law of the land, it's time to move on. We are the frog sitting in the pot, and it is slowly boiling, and we just think, well, things are still pretty good, it's nice and warm in here, and we just move on to the next issue until pretty soon there is no next issue, and you're belly up. And that's why I'm running. Because we have an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to take America back. You go on my website, I have a great song, it's called Take Back America. It's a great little song. I encourage you to download it and play it with a small contribution. But you stick with me. You give me a chance. And you can be supporting another candidate, that's okay. There's lots of candidates out there. Support more than one if you want. But help me. Make sure my voice is out there. Make sure someone's holding these folks accountable. Make sure someone's speaking for the truth. Whether you're for me or not, whether you're voting for me, I don't need your vote right now. I just need your help to get this message out. Thank you all very much.